Early morning, February 1st, 2026. A masked man stands at the front door of an 84-year-old woman's home in Tucson, Arizona. He carries a black backpack, he wears gloves, and in his mouth, freeing both hands, he holds a flashlight. The doorbell camera captures every second. 79 days later, his name is still unknown. The woman he came for is still missing. And the blood found on that front porch has been confirmed as hers. This is the case of Nancy Guthrie, mother of NBC Today show host Savannah Guthrie, a vulnerable elderly woman who vanished from her Catalina foothills home while her family slept. A case with everything: federal agents, SWAT teams, cutting-edge forensic science, a $1.2 million reward, and a doorbell camera that recorded the face of a man no one can identify. A case with everything except the one thing that matters: a suspect. If you've been waiting for a case that shows how modern investigations unfold in real time, how forensic science meets its limits, and how a community can be both desperate for answers and victimized by false hope, this is that case. And if you want to follow investigations like this as they develop, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Files, because the next piece of this story could break at any moment. Nancy Guthrie was not supposed to be difficult to find. She was 84 years old, reliant on daily medication, and living in a neighborhood where neighbors knew neighbors and front porch cameras captured every delivery. She attended church regularly, participated in live-streamed services with friends, and stayed in close contact with her family. Her daughter, Savannah, was one of the most recognizable faces on American morning television. Her son-in-law, her other children, her entire network moved around her life with the kind of attentiveness families reserve for the people they know are vulnerable. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Nancy's son-in-law dropped her off at her Catalina foothills home around 9:50 in the evening. It was an ordinary Friday night. She went inside. The door closed. That was the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie as a free woman. The next morning, February 1st, family members arrived to check on her. She had not appeared for a planned live-streamed church service, and that absence was unusual enough to warrant concern. When they entered the home, Nancy was not there. Her phone was, her personal belongings were, the medication she needed to take daily was still inside, and on the front porch there was blood. Pima County Sheriff's Department responded. So did the FBI. So did Customs and Border Protection and local search and rescue teams. This was not being treated as a woman who wandered away. This was being treated as an abduction. The scene was processed with the kind of forensic attention reserved for the cases investigators know will be scrutinized nationally. Blood samples were collected, fibers were gathered, biological material was swabbed, and approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home, a glove was recovered that appeared similar to the gloves worn by someone who had been recorded on camera. That camera was a Nest doorbell system mounted at Nancy's front door, and what it captured in the early morning hours of February 1st became the image every investigator, every news outlet, and every member of the public would return to for the next 79 days. A man, average build, approximately 5'9" to 5'10", wearing a black face mask and gloves, carrying a 25-liter black Ozark Trail Hiker Pack backpack, a model sold at Walmart stores nationwide, and in his mouth, positioned so both hands were free, a flashlight. The footage, later released by the FBI, shows him moving near the front door in a manner investigators described as consistent with someone tampering with the camera. Former FBI agent Jennifer Kidnapper, who has been a consistent outside voice on this case, analyzed the movements on air. She noted that the man appeared to be using his left hand to manipulate the door, while his right hand knocked. She has also floated, and she described this plainly as speculative, the possibility that there may have been a second person inside the house at the moment the masked man was on the porch. But speculation is not evidence, and evidence in this case has been both abundant and maddeningly inconclusive. The blood on the porch was tested and confirmed to belong to Nancy Guthrie. The glove found 2 miles away produced a DNA profile, but that profile did not match anyone in the FBI's combined DNA index system, known as CODIS. It did not match any other sample recovered inside the home. Subsequent reporting tied the glove profile to a restaurant worker employed nearby. someone with no connection to the case. That line of inquiry resolved. The glove was eliminated. Inside the home, additional DNA evidence was collected, but this evidence presented a problem forensic scientists know well and struggle to solve. The samples were mixed. They contained genetic material from 3 or more individuals, and the mixture was complex enough that deconvolution software, the tool laboratories use to separate individual contributors, could not produce a clean profile. Without a clean profile, the DNA could not be run against databases. Without a database match, the DNA could not produce a name. And without a name, the investigation had no suspect. But there was one piece of biological evidence that was separate from the mixture, a hair sample. And that hair sample would, weeks later, become the forensic hope the case has been waiting for. 9 days after Nancy disappeared, the FBI made its first major public move. On February 10th, the Bureau released the clearest photos and the first video from the doorbell camera. The images showed the masked man in detail. The public, which had been following the case since Savannah Guthrie first made a tearful appeal on national television, finally had a face to search for, even if that face was hidden behind a mask. Within hours of the FBI release, the case produced its first detention. A man was stopped following a traffic stop south of Tucson, in a community called Rio Rico, approximately 60 miles from the city. The Pima County Sheriff's Department posted on social media that a subject was being questioned in connection with the investigation. A property in Rio Rico was searched, and the community, which had been waiting 9 days for any indication the investigation had a person of interest, went through a cycle that would become grimly familiar. Hopeful posts flooded social media. News outlets amplified the detention. The letters POI, person of interest, ran in capital letters over every repost. The cycle lasted less than 24 hours. On February 11th, the man was released. He identified himself to Telemundo as Carlos Palizuelos. He said he was a delivery driver. He said he did not know who Nancy Guthrie was. He said he was not involved in any kidnapping. His mother-in-law, speaking to CNN, said her son-in-law had nothing to do with it. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed that the adult male detained, as part of follow-up on incoming leads, had been released without charges. The first pattern was established: detention, questioning, release, no charges, no named suspect. The community, which had leaned forward with hope, leaned back with disappointment. 3 days later, the pattern repeated. But this time, it was not 60 miles south of Tucson. It was 2 miles from Nancy's front door. On Friday, February 13th, late at night, the Pima County Sheriff's Department posted that a law enforcement operation was underway at a residence in the Catalina foothills area. This was not a traffic stop. This was a SWAT deployment. Forensic vehicles arrived. FBI agents were on scene. So were officers from the Sarita Police Department and the Oro Valley Police Department. A resident of the Shadow Hills neighborhood told local news she had witnessed 3 people being detained, a man and a woman at the house, a third person in a traffic stop a few miles away, and then the gray Range Rover entered the story. FBI agents converged on the parking lot of a Culver's restaurant, a family-friendly establishment where the vehicle had been pulled in. The Range Rover was photographed. It was searched. It was covered with a tarp, and it was towed. By morning, the images of that tarp being placed over the vehicle had been shared thousands of times. The story had every element a major news operation amplifies: the SWAT team, the detentions, the luxury vehicle towed from a suburban parking lot. And within hours, the resolution arrived in the now familiar direction. No arrests announced. None of the detained individuals remained in custody in connection with the Guthrie case. Luke Daly was identified in the reporting as one of the people detained during the February 13th operation. The identification came through his attorney, Chris Copley, who confirmed that his client had been the subject of 2 search warrants served that day. Daly and his mother had both been detained while those warrants were executed at the home. Both had been released without charges. Copley publicly disavowed any connection between Daly and the Guthrie case. The second cycle was complete: detention, questioning, release, no charges, no named suspect. The community leaned forward again, and the community leaned back again. 2 rounds in 2 weeks. And across both, the investigation's public score sheet had not changed. No arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed motive. Nancy Guthrie still missing. The family did not stop. On February 24th, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings announced that they were offering a reward of up to $1 million for information leading to Nancy's recovery. That reward, combined with the FBI's existing reward of up to $100,000, brought the total to $1.2 million. Savannah later clarified in an Instagram post that the reward could be paid in cash and that anonymous tips were eligible. The family had left almost no procedural reason for a potential tipster to hold back. But the tips that mattered, the tips that could identify the masked man on the doorbell camera, had not yet arrived. Or if they had arrived, they had not yet produced an arrest. Behind the scenes, the forensic work continued. The mixed DNA from inside Nancy's home remained the obstacle the investigation could not solve with traditional methods. But forensic science in 2026 has tools that did not exist a decade earlier. Investigative genetic genealogy, the technique that identified the Golden State Killer and has contributed to identifications in a growing catalog of cold cases, requires a clean enough profile to build a family tree. If the FBI laboratory at Quantico could extract a usable profile from the hair sample, that profile could be uploaded to genealogical databases. And if the profile produced matches to distant relatives, forensic genealogists could build a tree backward until the branches narrowed to a name. Genetic genealogist C.E.C. Moore, who works with Parabon Nanolabs and has contributed to some of the highest profile investigative genetic genealogy cases in the United States, addressed the Nancy Guthrie case on News Nation. She pointed specifically to the doorbell camera footage, to the moment when the masked man held a flashlight in his mouth. Saliva, she explained, is a category of biological evidence crime scene investigators know how to recover. If saliva was transferred to the camera housing, to the shrub beside the door, or to any nearby surface, it could be swabbed. And the man's saliva, in Moore's analysis, was a likely place to find the profile the investigation needs. But Moore also acknowledged the challenge. In a house like Nancy Guthrie's, knowing where to start swabbing is hard. While the forensic scientists worked, a separate investigation was unfolding, not into Nancy's disappearance, into the man leading the search for her. Sheriff Chris Nanos had been Pima County's top law enforcement officer since winning election years earlier. He had presented himself as a career lawman with more than 4 decades of service, a background that included time with the El Paso Police Department before moving to Arizona. His publicly posted resume listed a departure from El Paso in 1984. But in March of 2026, the Arizona Republic published an investigation that raised questions about that timeline and about statements Nanos had made under oath. According to the Republic's reporting, internal affairs records from the El Paso Police Department showed that Nanos had resigned in lieu of termination in August of 1982, 2 years earlier than his resume indicated. Those records also reportedly detailed a disciplinary history that included 8 suspensions totaling 34 to 37 days. The suspensions, according to the reporting, were for incidents including a shot fired, off-duty gambling, habitual tardiness, insubordination, and excessive force. In December of 2026, months before Nancy Guthrie disappeared, Nanos sat for a deposition in a lawsuit filed by Aaron Cross, the president of the Pima County Deputies Organization. During that deposition, Nanos was asked whether he had ever received discipline rising to the level of suspension. He answered, no. The El Paso records, as reported by the Arizona Republic, indicated 8 suspensions. The discrepancy was now public. The sheriff's department, through a spokesperson, attributed the publicly posted resume's dates to what it called clerical errors. Nanos himself defended his career record in broad terms, pointing to more than 4 decades of service and characterizing his tenure as rooted in public accountability. But the men and women who worked under him were not satisfied. On March 24th, the Pima County Deputies Organization passed a no-confidence vote against Sheriff Nanos. The reporting placed the vote at 241 in favor of the option labeled no confidence and resign. 65 deputies abstained. 0 votes were cast for the option labeled confidence and continue. Not a single deputy who cast a non-abstention vote sided with the sheriff. The union called for his resignation. The Pima County Board of Supervisors took notice. On the same day as the no-confidence vote, the board met and directed its legal counsel to draft language requiring Nanos to provide reports under oath. 2 weeks later, on April 7th, the board voted unanimously to invoke Arizona Revised Statute 11-253, a territorial-era state law that allows the board to compel sworn testimony from a county employee about the specific duties of their position. The law includes a provision that non-compliance can open a legal pathway to removal from office. The board formally delivered 4 questions to Nanos. He was given 10 business days to respond, a deadline that would land on April 21st, the board's next scheduled meeting. The questions covered his prior representations about his El Paso employment, any prior disciplinary history, disciplinary actions involving his former political opponent, a woman named Heather LaPan, the department's coordination with federal immigration officials, and budget overruns. Matt Hines, vice chair of the board, was quoted by Arizona Public Media saying Nanos must provide a substantive response. Beyond the board, there was a recall effort. Daniel Gutierrez, a Republican congressional candidate, launched the formal recall process in March. Gutierrez told Arizona Public Media that Nanos' handling of the Nancy Guthrie case was, in his words, a big embarrassment to the community, and that the reporting on Nanos' work history compelled him to start the campaign. The recall effort, by most assessments, faced high procedural barriers in Arizona, but it was active, and it was public. Sheriff Chris Nanos, in other words, was leading the highest-profile missing person investigation in the country, while his own credibility, his own employment, and his own legal standing were under siege. And then there was the friction with the FBI. Reporting first published by Reuters and confirmed by Fox News Digital described a period of tension between the sheriff's office and the Bureau over where the physical evidence in the Nancy Guthrie case should be tested. According to that reporting, the FBI had asked Nanos for the evidence, including the glove and the DNA from the home, to be processed at the FBI's National Crime Laboratory in Virginia. The sheriff, according to the reporting, insisted instead on using a private laboratory in Florida. One source told Fox News Digital that the FBI would need to retest the evidence anyway, that the Bureau's own methods could do the work without destroying the sample, and that in a case like this, time matters. The sheriff's department pushed back on the framing. In a statement posted to social media in mid-April, the department wrote that it had worked with the FBI since the beginning of the investigation, that the reporting was not new information, and that the private Florida laboratory continued to share information with the FBI laboratory and with other partner laboratories across the country. DNA analysis, the statement said, remained ongoing. Both statements could be true. The FBI could have the hair sample. The Bureau and the Sheriff's Office could have had an earlier dispute over which laboratory would handle the rest of the evidence. The Sheriff's Department could be cooperating now. It could also have taken, from the FBI's perspective, longer to get there than the Bureau would have preferred. By mid-April, the case had been running for more than 70 days. The doorbell camera footage had been public for more than 2 months. The $1.2 million reward had been in place for weeks, and the public score sheet had not changed. No arrest, no named suspect, Nancy Guthrie still missing. And then, on a Wednesday in mid-April, something happened on live television that would become the subject of intense speculation for the next 72 hours. Savannah Guthrie sat next to actress Anne Hathaway on the set of The Today Show. She teased the interview. She mentioned The Devil Wears Prada sequel. The show cut to commercial, and when the show came back, Savannah was no longer in the interview chair. Hoda Kotb was. Hoda, who had been filling in for co-anchor Craig Melvin during a vacation week, conducted the interview without explanation. Savannah returned briefly at the end of the broadcast for a short food-related segment with the rest of the anchors. The show offered no comment. NBC offered no comment. Anne Hathaway offered no comment. The span of airtime in which Savannah Guthrie disappeared became the span of airtime the internet could not stop replaying. The Daily Mail moved first. The paper reported, citing an unnamed NBC insider, that the Today Show had put a 3-word code in place for Savannah. The reporting said that if a development landed in Nancy's case during a live broadcast, a producer would quietly approach Savannah and tell her she was needed off set, not that she had a call. Not that she was wanted in the control room. Needed offset. 3 words. And the insider told the Daily Mail the show would pull her mid-broadcast if it had to. A second source, also cited by the Daily Mail, pulled the temperature down. That source pointed out that hosts tease upcoming portions of a broadcast and hand them off all the time, that a CO host stepping in was not unusual, and that the absence of an explanation did not on its own prove anything. Both explanations landed in the public record by the end of Wednesday. The cautious one, the dramatic one, and the case's audience, being what it is, did not wait for corroboration. The dramatic explanation got a head start. The day after the Wednesday mid-show moment, the case did move. It moved quietly, the way case evidence moves when it is not being announced at a press conference. Sources familiar with the investigation told Fox News Digital and ABC News that DNA evidence recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home, including test results from a hair sample, had been received by the FBI. The sample had been collected weeks earlier. The testing had been in process at the private laboratory in Florida, and within the last few days, the results had been shared with the FBI laboratory for further analysis. This was not a closure moment. This was, in the language the reporting itself used, an advanced examination with no guaranteed output, but it was the most substantive forensic development the case had produced in weeks, and it sat underneath the next event like a foundation the event would briefly be allowed to stand on. On Friday evening, April 18th, a well-known true crime broadcast went to air with a single word in the community's feed: bombshell. If you're following true crime files, you know that in cases like this, hope and disappointment can arrive in the same 12-hour window. Make sure you're subscribed, because when the next development lands in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, you'll see it here first. Crime Stories with Nancy Grace is a podcast and broadcast that circulates through the usual true crime platforms. On Friday, April 18th, investigative reporter Dave Mack appeared on the program and began talking about a person south of Tucson who had been detained for questioning in the Nancy Guthrie case. Not a confirmed arrest, not a named individual, a tip, a detention, a possibility. The community leaned forward because the geography was familiar. South of Tucson is where the Rio Rico detention unfolded in February. South of Tucson is where Carlos Palazuelos was pulled over, taken in, questioned for hours, and released without charges. When Dave Mack said south of Tucson on a Friday evening in April, he was not naming a random direction on a map. He was pointing back to a region the investigation had already searched once without producing a named suspect. He framed it on air in the language of a tip that had reached the broadcast rather than a confirmed arrest from the sheriff's office. The episode description on the public podcast listing reflected this: 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, mother of Savannah Guthrie, missing 76 days. The program is also hearing someone may have been detained. That language, hearing someone may have been detained, is the language of a tip passing through a broadcast pipeline, not the language of a confirmed arrest. Mack went further on air. He pointed to the mid-show moment with Savannah on Wednesday. The Anne Hathaway interview she teased and then did not conduct. The handoff to Hoda Kotb. The absence of explanation from the network. He framed it as a development worth reading alongside the rumor. Nancy Grace, on the same broadcast, connected the two. If the mid-show moment had involved a code word notification to Savannah, the notification would have been about a recovery, an identification, or a death announcement. Savannah came back for the tail end of the broadcast, which Grace suggested meant the notification was not a discovery of her mother, which meant the notification, if there had been one, was something else, possibly a detention. Possibly the detention Dave Mack was now reporting had happened south of Tucson. That was on-air analysis. That was commentary, not corroboration. It connected dots in a way that made narrative sense to the audience, but it did not produce the dots. The dots had to come from law enforcement, and by Friday evening, law enforcement had not produced them. The Pima County Sheriff's Department had not confirmed a detention. The FBI had not confirmed a detention. No court docket had surfaced. No booking photo had been released. The entire structure of the story, as the community consumed it, rested on an unsourced tip on Crime Stories and on-air extrapolation from the Wednesday Today Show moment. And the audience, already primed by 10 weeks of waiting, filled in the specifics the broadcaster did not provide. Social media accounts amplified. Aggregation sites scraped the posts and published blog versions. By the time the original broadcaster had moved on to the next case on the rundown, the claim had grown a second life on platforms the broadcaster did not control. The word finally appeared in thousands of comments. The phrase, "Please let this be it," ran underneath every repost. As the rumor spread and the view counts climbed, there was underneath it a very specific absence. Nobody had named the detained person. Nobody had identified the agency that had made the detention. Nobody had a location, a specific time, or a single on-the-record source in law enforcement. What was circulating was a broadcaster's description of a tip and a panel's on-air speculation about the link between that tip and an unrelated mid-show television moment from 2 days earlier. Fox News digital reporter Michael Ruiz went to Sheriff Chris Nanos on Friday. The question was direct. He asked whether a new person of interest had been detained overnight in the Nancy Guthrie case. The answer came back one word long: nope. Ruiz published that answer on social media, and the rumor, which had been building for hours, collapsed inside a single screenshot. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Kidnapper confirmed it. She wrote directly that according to Sheriff Nanos, no one was detained the night before in Nancy's case. Despite some people on social media reporting it, Yahoo News confirmed it. TV Insider confirmed it. Parade confirmed it. Within 12 hours of the Crime Stories broadcast, every major outlet covering this case had run the same headline with the same one-word quote, "Nope." Nanos had not held a press conference to deny the rumor. He had answered a reporter's question, one word, and then he had moved on. In 10 weeks of this case, Sheriff Nanos has not been a man of few words. He has spoken at multiple press conferences. He has given interviews to local Tucson outlets. He has responded to questions on his department's handling of the investigation, on his cooperation with the FBI, on his decision to use a Florida laboratory rather than the FBI's laboratory for certain evidence. In a local interview in late March, he defended the handling of the scene in pointed terms, saying he had no regrets about his team and their efforts. So a one-word answer from Chris Nanos is, in context, louder than it looks on the page. Nope is not an elaboration. It is the shortest possible closure of a rumor. And what makes it heavier, if you read it the way the case demands, is what it did not say. It did not say there had been a detention, but that no charges had followed. It did not say there had been an interview that stopped short of a detention. It did not describe a tip that had been investigated and discounted. It said, nope, which means, at least as the sheriff's office was willing to confirm on the record, there was nothing to investigate and discount in the first place. The third cycle was complete. Detention rumor, community hope, one-word denial, deflation, and 76 days into the investigation, the public score sheet still had not changed. When the Friday rumor collapsed, the conversation shifted in a predictable way. The people who had posted "finally" and "please let this be it" moved within hours to the posts that have been running underneath this case for weeks. The inventory of what the community is actually holding. What the community is actually holding is a still unidentified man on a doorbell camera. A male of average build, approximately 5'9" to 5'10" tall, wearing a face mask, wearing gloves, and carrying a 25-liter black Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack. A man described by the FBI, based on forensic analysis of the footage, as someone whose movements suggest he may have been tampering with the camera. A man described by former FBI agent Jennifer Kidnapper, in on-air analysis, as someone whose body language indicates he may have been trying to open the door with his left hand while knocking with his right. A man who has been seen by millions of people and identified by none. What the community is actually holding is a cluster of DNA evidence that has not produced a named suspect. The glove DNA, recovered approximately 2 miles from the home, resolved to a restaurant worker with no connection to the case. The mixed DNA inside the home has defied the deconvolution tools the investigation has had at its disposal. The hair sample is in the hands of the FBI and remains, at the time of this recording, under analysis. What the community is actually holding is a family that has not stopped asking. Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today anchor desk on April 6, wearing a yellow dress that echoed the yellow flowers loved ones had placed at her mother's Catalina Foothills home. Savannah's siblings, Cameron Guthrie and Annie Guthrie, have been posting social media videos. The family has made clear that the $1.2 million reward can be paid in cash, that anonymous tips are eligible, and that the family has left almost no procedural reason for a potential tipster to hold back. What the community is actually holding is the Sheriff's Department's own procedural record on the case, the neighborhood canvassing, the request to residents within a 2-mile radius of the Catalina Foothills home to review any camera footage from January 1st through February 2nd for anything they considered unusual or significant, the multi-agency collaboration with the FBI, Customs and Border Protection, and search and rescue teams, the confirmation that Nancy was dropped off at her home by her son-in-law the evening of January 31st around 9:50 in the evening, and that family members checked on her the following late morning when she did not appear for a planned live-stream church service with friends, the confirmation that her phone and her personal belongings were still inside the home when family arrived, the confirmation that blood on the front porch matched Nancy's, the description of Nancy as a vulnerable adult due to her age, her mobility limitations, and her reliance on daily medication. The medication line has been one of the quiet pressures on the clock of this investigation from the beginning, and what the community is actually holding, underneath all of it, is the question the Friday rumor tried and failed to answer: who is the man on the doorbell camera? Because until that question is answered, every south of Tucson detention, every hair sample, every board of supervisors vote, every one-word answer from a sheriff is an event sitting on top of a case whose foundational mystery has not moved. Chris Nanos is not having a calm 79th day of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. The no-confidence vote from his deputies, the resume discrepancies exposed by the Arizona Republic, the Board of Supervisors invoking a territorial-era law that can open a pathway to his removal, the recall campaign, the federal lawsuits, the perjury review, and through it all, the unanswered question of who took Nancy Guthrie and where she is now. On April 21st, Sheriff Nanos is scheduled to provide his sworn response to the 4 questions the Board of Supervisors delivered. That response will set the tone for the next phase of institutional pressure on the sheriff's office. Whether the board accepts it as substantive, whether it moves toward additional action, and whether the recall campaign picks up or slows based on what the response contains. Under that institutional story, the investigative story continues. The FBI's analysis of the hair sample is ongoing. The mixed DNA from inside the home remains the obstacle the investigation has been asked to solve. Investigative genetic genealogy, the technique that produced the identification of the Golden State Killer and has contributed to identifications in a growing catalog of cold cases, requires a clean enough profile to build a genealogical tree. If there is saliva, if there is an extractable profile, if the FBI laboratory can do what the Florida laboratory could not, then the profile goes up against the genealogical databases, and the man on the doorbell camera has a name. Until then, the community does the thing the community has been doing for 79 days. It watches, it waits, it reads the credible reporting. It resists the tips that do not come with attribution. It holds its temperature steady through the Friday rumors and the one-word answers. There is a reason the Friday rumor worked on the community as fast as it did. It worked because the community had watched this sequence play out before, not once, but twice in the first 2 weeks of the case. One of those sequences unfolded south of Tucson, in the same general direction the Friday rumor pointed. The other unfolded 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's front door. Different ground, same outcome. The detention ended the way the Friday rumor ended. The man was released after several hours. He identified himself as Carlos Palizuelos. He said he was a delivery driver. He said he did not know who Nancy Guthrie was. He said he was not involved in any kidnapping. 3 days later, a separate operation unfolded much closer to Nancy's home in the Catalina Foothills. A SWAT team, forensics vehicles, and a gray Range Rover towed from a nearby Culver's restaurant, where 3 people were detained. When the smoke cleared, no one had been charged in connection with the Guthrie case at all. Nobody stopped on the Rio Rico Road, at the Catalina Foothills home, or at the Culver's parking lot, has been named as a suspect in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. That is the pattern. Detention, release, no charge, no named suspect, twice in the first 2 weeks. And on Friday in April, a variation on the third attempt, a rumor that a third detention had happened south of Tucson, killed inside 12 hours by a one-word denial from the sheriff. 3 rounds at the same rodeo. 3 times the community leaned forward. 3 times the community leaned back. And across all 3, the investigation's public score sheet has not changed. No arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed motive. Nancy Guthrie still missing. There is a tension inside the evidence pipeline that has run through this case from the first week of February. When Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI arrived at the Catalina Foothills home the morning of February 1st, the forensic collection was significant and layered. Blood was found on the front porch, and later confirmed to be Nancy's. A glove was recovered approximately 2 miles from the home. A glove that investigators said appeared similar to the gloves worn by the masked man on the Nest doorbell camera. Fibers, hair, biological samples, all of it went out for testing. The glove produced a profile. That profile did not match anyone in the FBI's combined DNA index system, and it did not match any other sample recovered inside the home. Subsequent reporting tied the glove profile to a restaurant worker employed nearby, someone with no connection to the case, and that line of inquiry resolved. The other DNA samples recovered inside the home have been more complicated. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has described the profile as mixed, containing genetic material from 3 or more individuals, and the mixture has posed a challenge for traditional database comparison. Deconvolution software, the tool forensic laboratories use to separate individual contributors from a mixed sample, has limits. When a mixture becomes complex enough, even the most advanced deconvolution cannot produce a single clean profile that can be run against a database. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer has said that in her understanding, a mixture of that complexity is not one that can be divided up, which brings the case to the hair. The hair is separate from the mixture. It has been described in the reporting as a sample that may undergo a different and more advanced form of forensic analysis. The kind of work the FBI laboratory at Quantico can do with technology, the private laboratory in Florida was not designed for. The reporting has used the language the FBI itself uses in other cases: advanced technology, new techniques, methods designed to extract information from samples that older processes would consume or destroy. Whether that reference is to investigative genetic genealogy, to a specific new extraction platform, or to something the Bureau has not publicly named, is not clear from the reporting. What is clear is that the hair sample now sits in the hands of the agency with the broadest toolkit in the United States for working with material like it. Genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, who works with Parabon Nanolabs and who has been one of the consistent outside voices on this case, addressed the Nancy Guthrie investigation on News Nation. She pointed specifically to the doorbell camera footage, to the moment when the masked man held a flashlight in his mouth. DNA, she said, is hardy, and it is possible there is still DNA at the scene. Saliva, if saliva was transferred to the camera housing, the shrub, or any nearby surface, is a category of biological evidence that crime scene investigators know how to swab. The man's saliva is, in her analysis, a likely place to find the profile the investigation needs. She also acknowledged that in a house like Nancy Guthrie's, the question of where to start swabbing is hard. The hair sample moving to Quantico is not a closure moment. It is, in the language the reporting itself has used, an advanced examination with no guaranteed output. But it is the most substantive forensic development the case has produced in weeks. And it is the quiet headline that sat underneath the Friday bombshell like a foundation the bombshell was briefly allowed to stand on. If the FBI laboratory can extract a usable profile from the hair sample, that profile can be uploaded to genealogical databases. If the profile produces matches to distant relatives, forensic genealogists can build a family tree backward until the branches narrow to a name. This is the technique that identified the Golden State Killer. This is the technique that has contributed to identifications in dozens of cold cases over the last decade. This is the technique that requires patience, precision, and a clean enough profile to build a tree. The community does not know if the hair sample will produce that profile. The FBI has not announced results. The sheriff's department has said DNA analysis remains ongoing. The family has continued to plead for information. And 79 days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, the man on the doorbell camera remains unnamed. If you've been following this case and want the next piece the moment it appears, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Files. The next development may be a court filing. It may be an FBI press release. It may be a Pima County Board of Supervisors vote. It may be a one-word answer that looks, in context, as heavy as this one did. And when it arrives, the coverage here will continue with the same attention to the facts, the same respect for the family, and the same commitment to the case the audience has been waiting to see solved. There is a word investigators and defense lawyers use when they talk about evidence: silence. Silence is not nothing. Silence is a category. What a witness does not say, what a document does not contain, what an agency declines to confirm, these are shapes in the record. And the shapes carry meaning. A one-word answer from a sheriff to a major market reporter about a nationally covered investigation is a shape, and what the shape contains when you trace it is information the audience does not immediately see. A sheriff who had detained a person of interest in a high-profile case would, in almost every instance, not answer a reporter's question with the single word, "Nope." He would either decline to comment, citing the investigation, or he would confirm the detention in limited terms consistent with departmental guidance. Nope is not a no comment. Nope is a denial. A sheriff who had not detained a person of interest, but who had an active lead in that direction, an interview scheduled, a search warrant pending, an identified individual whose whereabouts were being tracked, would in almost every instance also not answer nope. He might decline. He might say the investigation remains active. He would not, as a matter of institutional prudence, close the door on a question about detention if the detention was being actively prepared. Nope is the shape of a door closed all the way. A sheriff who knows there is no lead in that direction at all, whose investigation has not produced a detainable person in the 76 days since the abduction, can answer nope without risk. Nope is low cost. Nope is accurate if the answer is literally no. And for an audience watching closely, nope is, intentionally or not, an admission that the case is exactly where the public evidence says it is, not where the audience wishes it were. That is why the nope has lived in the news cycle longer than the underlying rumor. The rumor was in the cycle for less than a day. The nope has been in the cycle for days. The nope is the sentence every aggregator headlined. It is the sentence that, 20 years from now, if this case resolves, will sit in the timeline of the investigation as the one-word marker of the Friday in April when the community briefly thought, and was wrong. This is not the sheriff's fault. He did not manufacture the rumor. He did not script the Wednesday mid-show handoff on Today. He did not send the tip to the Crime Stories broadcast. What he did was answer a question. The answer closed a hopeful narrative the community had built in the absence of institutional transparency. And the closure of that narrative is, for a case that has now run 79 days, a quiet but heavy thing. Because every closure of a false narrative is a narrowing, and every narrowing is an implicit admission that the true narrative, whatever it turns out to be, has not yet been produced in public. The next 48 to 72 hours after this recording will not, on any realistic reading of the case, produce an arrest. The FBI laboratory does not announce hair sample results in the same week a sample arrives. The Pima County Board of Supervisors is scheduled to meet on April 21st. That meeting will publicly surface, in whatever form Nanos chooses to provide it, his response to the 4 questions the board sent after its April 7th vote. The response will set the tone for the next phase of institutional pressure on the sheriff's office. Whether the board accepts it as substantive, whether it moves toward additional action under Arizona, revised statute 11-253, and whether the recall campaign picks up or slows based on what the response contains. Under that institutional story, the investigative story continues. The FBI's analysis of the hair sample is ongoing. The mixed DNA from inside the home remains the obstacle the investigation has been asked to solve. Investigative genetic genealogy requires a clean enough profile to build a genealogical tree. And if the FBI laboratory can do what the Florida laboratory could not, then the profile goes up against the genealogical databases, and the man on the doorbell camera has a name. Until then, the community does the thing the community has been doing for 79 days. It watches, it waits, it reads the credible reporting. It resists the tips that do not come with attribution. It holds its temperature steady through the Friday rumors and the one-word answers. Anyone with information on the whereabouts of Nancy Guthrie is urged to contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4909. The combined reward for information leading to her recovery is up to $1.2 million. Tips can be anonymous. The reward can be paid in cash. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has been missing since February 1, 2026. Her daughter has pleaded for her return on national television. Her family has offered more than $1 million for information. The FBI has deployed some of the most advanced forensic techniques available in modern criminal investigation. And 79 days later, the man on the doorbell camera is still unidentified. The blood on the porch is still Nancy's, and the question that has anchored this case from the beginning is still unanswered. Who is the masked man? And where is Nancy Guthrie? If this case has shown you anything, it is that investigations unfold in weeks and months, not in hours. That forensic science has limits, that hope and disappointment can arrive in the same 12-hour window, and that a community desperate for answers can be both supported and victimized by the true crime media ecosystem that covers these cases in real time. This is True Crime Files. If you want to follow this case as it develops, if you want to see the next piece of evidence the moment it becomes public, and if you want coverage that prioritizes facts over speculation, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, hit the like button if this video helped you understand the case, and share it with anyone who has been following Nancy's story. Because the more people who know the details, the more likely it is that someone with information will come forward. 79 days, no arrest, no named suspect. The masked man remains nameless. Nancy Guthrie remains missing. And the case that has everything except the one thing that matters continues. This has been True Crime Files. Stay informed, stay careful, and if you know something, say something.